This is part 4 of the assessment of spotted sea trout in Louisiana waters. Welcome back. Part 4 has been a while in coming, but I was hoping that I could do something on the management option that Wildlife and Fisheries would present. And the good news is, they're out. The options were presented to the Fisheries Commission by Wildlife Fisheries on January 9th. And you notice that I'm using the plural here, options, and not just option. You know, Wildlife and Fisheries did a really good job here. They didn't just come out with their preferred management approach, throw it out there to the commission and see what they think. Up, yes, no, and then we'll throw it over the fence to the public for comment. They took a different approach. They brought a bunch of different options, some of which would never be the choice, and you will see for obvious reasons. But in this way, they let the public and the commissioners see how these things were derived and what are the implications of these different approaches. And so I want to take you through all these management options and show you what the implications are, how it would affect you in the fishery in general. And I'm going to do that in the first part of this video, but stick around for the second part because I'm going to show you some really revealing reasons why some of these options came out of the analysis the way they did. And this, of course, is my perspective, not Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries, but I believe there's some very good mathematical explanations of why these options look the way they do. So stick around and let's jump into it. I'm going to start with this chart. This is the female spawning stock biomass in millions of pounds. And to hit some of the critical details about this chart, we're going to start right up here with the limit and the target. So this is the limit, meaning the lowest value from 1982 to 2009, of which the SSB had ever been, which was 4.7 million pounds. And then the target was the median during that period of time, which was 6.4 million pounds. So here's a limit. They don't want it to drop below that limit. They want it to be up at the yellow line or above, which is the target. So the black curve is where is the measured SSB. They only show it back to 2010, but you can see it dropped, and this is the period of concern, and we dropped below the limit in 2015 and then continued down. This is where we are in 2019. And you can see that the projection, if we do nothing, is the black line, and it drops down even more and then just continues to slowly go down over time. In other words, fishing will just get worse and worse. They have chosen a 20% savings as their target savings. So what these savings values mean is a savings over the current female yield. So again, this whole chart is about the female trout. And so if you have a 10% savings, it means you have harvested 10% less. So 20% less, 30% less. And they have chosen 20% as their target, and that's the blue line. You can see it gets us up above the target, nicely above the target. Their stated goal was to get above the target by 2025. So that 20% savings line would do that. 30% gives us a huge increase. This would be really up to historical levels, historical highs. The 10% savings does not do it. You just get above the limit, barely above the limit. You don't approach the target at all. So they want to be on this blue line. Now, in all of these management options, there is a kind of best case and worst case as far as discard mortality. Now, I know a lot of people are talking about discard mortality and raising reasonable questions about if we catch a lot of smaller fish below the minimum length limit, and then we throw them back, how many fish are we killing? Well, based on their studies and studies from other states, they believe in best case, you're only going to kill 10%. Worst case, you're going to kill 25%. So that's what it's based on. And they break up the management options into a lot of best case scenario and worst case scenario. So let's go right to the management options, starting with changes to the creel limit. And we're going to start with the best case. So this is only a 10% discard mortality. And again, here is this savings rate. Remember, they want to get to 20% savings, which is here. So there is a curve for each minimum length limit value. So 12 inch, 13, 14, 15, 16 is what they show. We are over here currently. We can keep 25 trout per day that are 12 inches or over. And so that gives us a savings of 0%. They want to get to 20%. So if we follow this blue line back, you'll see that we don't reach 20% until we get to a 10 fish per day per person creel limit. So that is quite a harsh change to go from 25 fish to 10 fish, but that's the only way to get to a 20% savings. The 13-inch minimum length limit is a little bit better. Looks like 20% to around 12, 13 fish. Now, when you look at the 14-inch minimum length limit, you can see that a 14-inch at 25 fish per person per day would be above or right around 20% savings. So that's pretty interesting. Unfortunately, when we go to the 25% discard mortality values, which a lot of people I think believe that the discard mortality will be relatively high. So if you want to go on that worst case scenario, you still if you stay with 12-inch MLL, you still get to 10, a creel limit of 10. 13-inch, you're around 12. And 14-inch, you're actually drop below at 25. So to get back to 20%, it's about 20 fish, a creel limit of 20 fish. Now, most of this Gulf states choose a creel limit in multiples of 5. So, there's 15, we get 25. There's 5s. I think it's only Florida that has broken it down, but they were at 5, and now some places are at 4. Other zones are at 6. So, but the limit got so low that I think they started working in multiples of 1. But it sounds to me, based on the report from Wildlife and Fisheries, that they would prefer to stay in a multiple of 5. So therefore, if you look at the 13-inch MLL, this would push you to 15. It would push you to a creel limit of 10 just to be able to get to 20%. So there may be no difference between the 13-inch MLL and the 12-inch MLL. Now you may notice that there's this huge differential between the 12 and 13-inch minimum length and the 14 and above. You can see that there's just this huge variance between the result and getting to 20%. And I'm going to explain one reason that that is the case. It's actually quite understandable from a mathematical relationship with fecundity itself, not even factoring in other things. So let's go to another scenario where we look at slot sizes. So starting with a 10%, now we have slot sizes from 12-inch to 20, and it's a maximum of 20 inches in all cases. So 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So you see that a slot limit, if you stay at a minimum of 12-inch, really doesn't make much difference. You would still have to go to a 10 creel limit. And 13, well, you may have to be at 10 as well. However, going again the 14 to 20 inch slot limit, you can see that you're even at 25, you're well above the 20% savings. If we go to the 25% discard mortality, again, similar situation for the smaller slot sizes. You still kind of end up at 10 creel limit. But the 14-inch to 20-inch slot limit looks like 25 fish creel limit still gets you above the 20% savings. So that is a kind of worst case with this slot, gets you where you need to be quite comfortably. So let's jump back to the point I made earlier about this huge disparity between creel limit options on the smaller fish, the 12 and 13 inch versus the 14 inch and above. You get twice the creel limit with the 14 inch minimum length versus 12 or 13 inch minimum length. And how can that be? Does that seem crazy? Well, I want to show you mathematically, based on the fecundity of trout, of why this is the case. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to pull some data from some various places. First of all, we need data about the fecundity, or the spawning, the egg production for speckled trout based on their age. And I'm going to use the University of Southern Mississippi data. This is from their website. If you go down here, they have a nice table from Mississippi that shows a relationship between the age of the trout and the number of eggs per batch. Now we're going to have to do some more work on making some assumptions about how many batches are produced per year, so that we can get some value out of this. And I'm going to use this chart that compares the length of the fish to the age. And this data is from a paper that I recently got. David Nealon and others wrote a paper, Age, Growth, and Reproduction of Spotted Sea Trout in Barataria Bay, Louisiana. So I'm going to use their table to show the relationship between length and age. There's a similar one in the trout assessment as well, but I'm just going to use theirs. So this is the total length in millimeters. I've converted to inches here. And then there's the open circles are females, and the males are the closed circles. We're not going to talk about the males. We're going to talk about the females. So you can see that there is quite a range between, these are all fish that they were caught and aged based on their length, and then looking at the otoliths to figure out their age. But we're going to look at the median, because that's a very reasonable thing to look at. And you can see that a median 12-inch trout's about 1 year old. And then a 2-year-old is about a 14-inch trout. A 3-year-old's about a 16-inch trout. A 4-year-old's around a 20-inch. And then extrapolated up to 5 years old would be around 24 inches. And you can see they didn't actually catch any This is from Barataria Bay. They didn't catch any 5-year-olds, which if you look in the stock assessment 2019, there weren't many 5-year-old fish found there either. Probably somewhat selective, that would be my guess, because the larger trout prefer saltier water, so they may not come in to where the sampling is going on. They may stay offshore. However, there are some other reasons as well, and a big one is due to the mortality rates that the researchers believe we have here in Louisiana. So I took the data from Mississippi. I made some assumptions about number of batch per year. There's quite a variation on the estimates of how often trout spawn, anywhere from 4 days to 2-3 weeks. However, I just used 1 week and a 4-month per year spawning. So they spawn 16 times a year, and so that's the data that I use for this. And so you can see on the curve that was produced when I put all that data together, you can see that it's less than 2 million eggs in its lifetime for a 1-year-old trout. But when you get up here to a 5-year-old trout, up to around 13 million eggs produced in its lifetime. So as you get above 3 years old, the number of eggs spawned in the lifetime of the fish really takes off. If you go up to a 1 to 7-year-old fish, now you can really see some crazy numbers. A 7-year-old fish, if I use that data to extrapolate up, it's looking at 45 million eggs spawned over its lifetime for a 7-year-old trout. And in Texas they say it's even more than that, but it doesn't really matter. It's just the important thing is to look at the relationship, and you can see once you get above 3 years old, 4 years old, that the eggs spawned really shoots up. But we're going to go back to the 1 to 5-year-olds, because this is really our Louisiana situation. So in order to look at this mathematical explanation of the disparity between the creel limits that are required to reach 20% savings, I'm going to be putting some values in here. We're going to compare different scenarios, and this is a bar chart that will display the data as we go along. I'm just using 100 fish, 100 trout, and I'm looking at their lifetime production of eggs on these 100 fish. So survival percentage year to year is the critical factor here. And there are multiple sources that say that 70 to 75% of the fish do not survive from year to year due to harvest and other factors. So I'm just going to use a 30% survival rate then from year to year, and I'll just populate this down for years 1 through 5. So we see that 77 million eggs are produced. I'm going to put it over here in this box, and boom, there it is on the bar chart. These numbers are pretty startling if you look at how this works out mathematically. Of 100 fish, after the first year, you only have 30 fish left. And then when you get down to 4-year-olds, you're only at 3%. You're actually not even at 1 5-year-old, but let's say it's 1%. If we go to data from the Louisiana stock assessment, you'll see that they have some data in here, percent of population that's more than 3 years of age. And you'll see that where we currently are right now is right around 5%, 5-6% of fish that are older than 3 years of age. And there is a huge variation. It goes up and down based on how much spawning stock biomass is in the water. So when you have a higher SSB, you have more of the larger fish. And I believe that's just because when you have more fish, then you have a lower percentage of those fish that are being harvested from year to year. That's the only explanation I can think of. And so, you know, when you have a low SSB, then the harvest is really cleaning out the fish, and it's like the scenario that we just saw on the table of that 100 fish. So you can see that these numbers agree pretty well with the data we just looked at from the stock assessment. That once you get over 3 years of age, the percentages are very low. So what happens if we were to release the 4 and 5 year old fish, so the bigger fish, so let's say over 20 inches? If we were to release those, because when we look at this curve, we can see that we really get a lot of egg production when you get over 3 years of age and up. So let's give these older fish 70% survival, because many of them were released. And okay, now we have a 98 million egg production from these 100 fish over their lifespan, which okay, that's somewhat of an increase. Not real impressive though. Didn't really improve things a whole lot just by releasing the larger fish. And again, this is very easy to see because, I mean, look at the drop just in the first year. It was huge. So the Free Willy scenario doesn't get you too much. Let's look at the minimum length limit of 14 inches. Again, we're harvesting these big ones, but we're not going to harvest the smaller ones. So let's return that to a 70% survival because we are not harvesting them. And wow, big increase. 179 million eggs produced just by keeping the age 1 fish alive. What if we go to the 15-inch minimum length limit? So we will keep the 2-year-olds alive. Big jump. 319 million eggs. So from baseline where we are now to a 15-inch MLL, you get a huge increase, even though you're still keeping the larger fish. But it's these fish that are in the 1 and 2-year-olds where you're getting your big hit, because we still have half the fish by the time they get to age 3. Huge difference. The last one let's look at is a slot. Let's look at the slot from 14 to 20. So again, we're going to harvest the 2-year-olds, but we're not going to harvest the bigger ones. So above 20 inches, we're not going to harvest them. And again, wow, big increase. 229 million eggs produced from these 100 fish. So again, this slot limit, big change to what we're seeing right now. 3 times as many eggs produced with the slot limit of 14 to 20 compared to the current scenario. So that's how I see the management options and some of the underlying reasons that I believe the analysis came out the way it did. We're going to be balancing creel limit and minimum legal length. One thing I want to remind you, because you already know this, but just so it's in the front of your mind, it takes a lot more 12-inchers to equal the same kind of yield that you would get for 14 and 16-inch fish. It probably takes something like 2 skinny 12-inchers to equal the same yield as a 14-inch trout, and certainly a 15-inch trout. So that's one thing I think about when I think about the management options and what will best suit my needs. Hey, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. That helps me get exposure for the video in the YouTube algorithm. You know, this whole YouTube business, it's a bit of a game. It's not so much about the quality of your video as it is it getting exposure? Do people give it thumbs up? That kind of thing, because the videos that get a lot of thumbs up, they get shown more, and then it's a snowball effect in the viewership. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, think about doing that. I'm going to be giving you good quality technical analysis on a lot of different subjects, as well as fishing content, fishing trips and experiences, and do think about the management options going forward. There will be a public comment period. So good luck out there.